Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think. Jamil and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. I'm Jamil Zanisha.
I'm Travis Cobble.
And I'm Mike Persine, and you're listening to Brew Strong.
Good job, everybody. We all remembered, including me, to say our names.
It's been a while. Gotta dig deep in that brain.
Yes. I have been on the road. I went to Iceland and Sweden and Germany and England, and I got pneumonia and a whole bunch of other things. So it kind of slowed me down a bit in between doing shows. Then we had the big Blickman Engineering retirement party up in North Lake Tahoe at Alibi Brewing or Alibi Beer Works, or I'm sorry, I
believe it's Alibi Brewing Company.
Yeah, if you're gonna name a brewery, just it's brewing company, whatever, and brewing company. I think, when you try and do beer works and ale this and all that stuff, it's like
fermentation project.
Yeah. You just confuse me. I'm limited in my ability to think. I drink, and then I'm old, and so you really don't want to make it complicated for me. Anyways, we brewed a spectacular beer that may still be on tap right now. I think it's called Blickman's Biscuits or something like that.
Yep.
The internal working name was Blickman's Nut Juice, but they went with biscuits instead.
We'll be having a can of that.
Yeah.
I wondered.
And Mike was there. He was meeting listeners and enjoying the party and hanging with Blickman and John Palmer and Justin Crosley was there. I was there. Mike was there. It was a great time. The people at Alibi could not have been nicer. And the reason we did it there was back in the day, we ran a Brew Strong competition or whatever, a drawing. Anybody that bought a Blickman system during this year, at the end of the year, we randomly drew from that collection of invoices the winner, and then the choice was we'd fly them out to Indiana to brew with all of us, or we'd actually go to their location to brew with them. So it turned out to be Kevin Drake before he started Alibi Brewing up in North Lake Tahoe. And so Blickman and Palmer and I went out there and brewed with him in his garage and hung out. It was the most spectacular weekend. All four of us just loved it. Had such a wonderful time that when I heard Blickman was retiring, I'm like, time to do a party. We got to go back. And so we went back, and it was a real special weekend. Had a wonderful time. But all you Blickman fans out there, don't fret. As of today, Blickman Engineering is still sponsoring this show, so you don't have to pay for it. The wonderful Drew Barnes is now the president and CEO of Blickman Engineering with John Blickman's retirement. So everything's still the same. In fact, I think, with new management, I think, new creative ideas going new places. I think you'll see some even more exciting things happening from Blickman Engineering. One of the great things that they've recently created is the 3.5 barrel Pro Surface electric brewing system. And they call it the Surface because no longer do you have, elements sticking in your kettle. they're all underneath and sealed elements, so you don't have to worry about them getting all nasty. You got more area for wort. You got easier cleaning. A whole host of reasons. And, it's a nice compact 3.5 barrel system that if you're starting your own craft brewery, you're interested in that, you do yourself some good to check this out. I know, like all Blickman Engineering products, they're really well made. They offer great value because of how well they innovate your brew day. And if you like the show, make sure you send Drew an email. He's going to get the feedback at Blickman Engineering emails, and I'm sure he would appreciate knowing that the money he's spending on this stuff is well worth the money. That's why I have asked my friend Scott Janish to join us here today, and we're going to talk about some cool things I learned about in Sweden. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I know last time the video problems were so bad, I thought you'd never speak to me again.
You're great. I love you. You are, you're a super, very selfless guy, and real humble, and very kind. You're fun to hang out with, and to add to all that, you have a ton of interesting information, a lot of knowledge that you've gleaned from other resources, you've developed yourself, you're putting these all together in innovative ways. You're making us think about the best way to make hoppy beers. And so it's always a pleasure to hang out with you, or to have you on the show. What I was referring to was Scott and I and Mitch Steele, we all went to Sweden and did the Brewers Conference there, which it's a small conference. I think it was like 150 people or something this year, maybe not even that. Tight little group, but it's all people very passionate, and so it's not one of these massive conferences where you don't get to talk to the speaker because they're swarmed in a crowd. We all hang out and chat with each other. But Scott had this great presentation, actually, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, all about, what hops can do. And one of the things that interested me is, over the years, what have I said about mash hopping? Why do it? Waste of time. What kind of makes the beer better? Or, it's more, it's better hop character, or all that crap that's been said, right?
What hop companies are telling you to do that, right?
Well, yeah. And, it's also, from, people like, well, in the German texts and, these, it's, it makes for, better bitterness. It makes for better, hop character. And, it's, they loosely use the term better bitterness or better hop character. And, my thing is, well, a lot of the German brewers, when they're talking about better hop character, they're talking about, less of the aromatics and flavor that we're talking about. They want a really clean, smooth bitterness that doesn't really get in the way of the malt character or, the flavor of the beer. They just want a nice balancing malt bitterness. It could be bitter, but could be, more, lighter. But they are not talking about the same kind of hop flavor when we're talking about hop flavor, more so today than in the past. But that was always one of my beefs. But Scott convinced me otherwise on mash hopping, I think.
I tried anyway. But yeah, it's a topic that I was equally as not so sure of when it all really started when I was researching for the book years ago, and I came across some research where it was looked at more so not really for flavor and a bitterness kind of avenue, but more a beer stability kind of approach, and which is one I hadn't seen before at the time. And the way they kind of, I don't remember the exact details of that study, but I do remember kind of walking away pretty convinced that it was something I should at least try, experiment with a little bit. And it really just came down to, and I'm sure people have maybe heard me kind of talk about this before, but it's really just the alpha and beta acids in hops themselves have the ability to complex problematic metals in your mash. So essentially they can lower some of those problematic metals, especially iron in your mash that, can cause problems with oxygen down the road. And so that's really kind of where I was, approach it as more of a flavor. I mean, it does have a flavor impact in the way, in the sense that it could help preserve your beer. That's kind of where I got interested in it. And we started doing it at Sapwood pretty early on, and we still do it to this day. So we've been mash hopping for, over 5 years. And had good results, but it's one of those things. I'm sure we can get into more details, but it's more of like an insurance thing. It's like a lot of things you do in brewing where, that there's research or people, very smart people that have been doing it one way for a long time. And, how to have a healthy fermentation, temperature ranges and you could sneak kind of outside some of those things and still make good beer, but you're kind of, you do that insurance thing where you kind of stay in that pocket. And so that's kind of where we, how we look at mash hopping. But yeah, I don't know how you want to dig into it right away, but.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll get into more of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about on mash hopping, how you mash hop and, what sort of amounts and what you can expect. We'll be back right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on 2 gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Back to the 2 guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're speaking with Scott Janish, who is, I want to say, my dear friend, and he is one of the owners of Sapwood Cellars, and also the author of New IP. The
new IPA.
The new IPA.
I read it cover to cover.
A scientific guide to hop aroma.
I always apologize to people when they say that.
And flavor.
I loved it. It was great. I actually, I wanted to kind of mention that book helped me actually with my hazy so much so that I feel like it was the reason I was able to win first place at NHC Regional in San Diego for my hazy. And I think you had a big part of that, Scott. So
oh, dude, that's awesome to hear. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, that was last year. And I just think after reading your book, I made that beer. And I think a lot of that was from your your writings.
That's cool. I appreciate you sharing that, and that's super fun to hear, because that's, a lot of times you put stuff out and you don't know who's reading or if it's being used, but and it's clearly, it's not a book telling you exactly how to do anything. It's just more of like think about my process. What can I experiment with? It sounds like you probably already had a pretty good process.
Yeah. I mean, I will say just to give you an example, like I cut down on oats after reading the part about oats retaining astringency and things like that. And, I've always been a cold dry hopper because of Mr. Zanishev over here, but it just reaffirmed that too. And then, little things like that have, that's a very valuable book for our listeners. If you're trying to make hazy hoppy beers, it's the book to read.
I appreciate that. And I think I'll give a shout out to those other brewers that at the end of that kind of talked about their process and just kind of laid out how they're making great beers too. And I think for a lot of people that might be the most beneficial for them.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would
it actually kind of reminded me back. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'd encourage people that are interested in brewing hoppy beers and hazy beers as well to get a copy of that book. It's still easily available. I also used it at Heretic when we had a hazy beer, and I'm just like, I wasn't happy with it, and I went through that, and like you're saying, I got a lot of notes on things I could do to improve the beer, and just drastically improve the beer. It's little tweaks, like anything. It's little tweaks here and there that make the difference between good and great. And that book also helped me. So yeah, if you're interested in brewing those kinds of beers, I would encourage you to find a new IPA. Here, I've got it. The New IPA Scientific Guide to Hop Aroma and Flavor by Scott Janish. You can find that everywhere fine books are sold.
If you're using the presentation Scott has on the web for free, you owe it to him to buy the book. And even if you just put it on the side and don't read it, go ahead and buy it.
Yeah, you'll find extra stuff in there.
I talk to people now that they read the book, and guys in my homebrew club, they're using it as a reference. Like literally they have like sticky notes in the book, and they use it as like a go-to when they're trying to, what was that? And they can pull it up. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's like the biggest compliment when the rare times someone asks you to sign it and you can tell they actually really read it. This is when you get a pristine book. That's
right. All right. Let's talk about mash hopping again. Like I said, I was always like, "What mash hopping? Come on, what does that do?" So walk us through what mash hopping is and why you want to do it.
Yeah, again, it was a study. It was 2016 was I think when that study was put out, and it was really looking at ways to reduce those metal content. So specifically iron. Those iron levels you want to keep as low as possible. It's below, like the numbers don't always mean a lot when you're like a home brewer and even pro brewer, since we're not testing all this stuff all the time. But it's the number you're like iron you're trying to keep under is like 50 micrograms per liter, which is a very small amount. And then that's too much over that, you can start to actually taste it. It's like a metallic flavor that you can get, and predominantly it's all coming from your grain. So your grist is what's comprising most of those metals. And so the idea and this study found that if you mash hop, so you're essentially adding some hops at the start of your mash, you can start complexing and reducing, pulling out some of those problematic metals, early in the process. So you can hopefully have a little more longevity in that beer. And interesting, they found pH matters in that. So, the higher your mash pH, the better. These authors found that the higher the pH, the better that the alpha acids were at complexing the metals and dropping that count. So, mash, that to me, that means, if you're going to experiment with mash hopping, you might as well try to add the hops before you pH adjust your mash, give it a little head start, and then kind of throw in some acid to get you down to your normal pH. So I thought, that was interesting. So what we do actually at Sapwood is we just take our mash hops and we just kind of sprinkle them in. We don't have a mill still. We still buy everything pre-milled and just kind of pour it in. And so we'll have all the bags open on our brew deck, and we'll just sprinkle in some hops in each one of those bags. So it's just going in, right with the grain, and it's kind of evenly distributed throughout the milling in process.
What's the amount of hops you use, and are you using whole hops, pellet hops? And what variety of hops are you using?
So we use pellets for pretty much everything. I think that's what most people are doing now. It's just so much easier than whole hops. But having said that, we use whole hops today in a lambic kind of inspired beer, but that's a whole different beast. We're usually, so the study that I referenced in the book, they used about 0.4 pounds a barrel of it was Columbus in that case, which got them about 20 IBUs, I believe, from the mash. And that dropped them about 30% in terms of total iron concentration. And so we go a little lower than that. So usually when we're brewing, we'll steal, it depends if we have bags open of hops or whatever that we're not going to use, we'll kind of use those as mash hops, or we can just steal some of the Whirlpool hops and just throw in some of those in the mash. But typically we're about 2 pounds per 10 barrel turn. And that's all we're using in the mash to try to reduce that iron concentration a little bit. So not a lot, but
now,
just a little bit.
Is that alpha acid dependent? You were mentioning the alpha acids are the things that are binding with the iron. And does that mean that if I used a 10 or 11% alpha hop, I can use less than I'm using a 3% alpha acid hop?
I would imagine so. I wish the study would be replicated again, where they used a bunch of different kind of alpha varieties. But yeah, I mean, if it's the alpha and beta hop or acids that are helping to complex those metals, I would imagine some of the higher ones would do a better job, especially again at that higher pH. So that's if we're brewing. A lot of times we'll use low alpha hops and a high alpha hop in one kind of turn. And so sometimes we won't have to cool one batch of our New England IPA because we're using something like Rawaka, which is real low, and we can kind of use those at just the knockout temperature, and then we can use the higher alpha on that second turn. Then we'll cool and run through the Whirlpool. And so sometimes we'll just steal some of those higher alpha ones. 2 pounds of that, and then throw those into the mash. It's really, again, like I kind of mentioned earlier, it's for us, it's kind of like an insurance plan. We believe the science, or at least I do, that it's helping to complex those metals. And so I'm not like overly, worried about exact alphas or anything like that. It's just trying to get it in there to help out. But again, you do pick up a little bitterness when you're mash hopping. So it's about 20 to 30% of what you would expect from a 60-minute addition. So it's, not a lot of IBUs, but still something to kind of factor in. In fact, we use Beersmith for our recipe development, and that has a mash hop option toggle. So it'll just create your IBUs from a mash hop just from right there.
Nice. Yeah. Beersmith, another excellent product.
Yeah, I like to use that's what I use myself. Scott, that 20 to 30%, is that because of the extract efficiency you get on the hops? I mean, because if all the alpha came into your wort, you expect to get your isomerization up to, 90 on pellets?
Yeah, well, you're just you're at a lower temperature, right? Because you're at your mash temperature is 154 or 155, something like that. And so, I mean, it's just similar to if you're knocking out at 200 degrees versus you're cooling to 180, you're getting different isomerization from those alpha acids.
Right. So you should be getting very minimal if your mash temperature is somewhere between, 150, 160.
What always blows my mind is because then it goes into your boil and you bring the temperature up.
Well, the question is how much goes into the boil or how much gets stuck on the husks or gets stuck on the grain, the remaining grain.
Complexes with iron.
How much is complex with iron?
It's stuck in the mash with the iron. Omega Yeast has done a lot of great research on this, and I love that they always tell us everything they're doing and show us their experiments. And I believe they also found about 20 to 30% utilization from mash hopping, but they were looking at it more in terms of adding thiol precursors to your wort if you're using one of those lower thiolized strains like Cosmic Punch. But interesting that their IBU rates were very similar to what was in the research prior for mash hopping.
Interesting. So before I want to talk about the thiol precursors as well in mash hopping, but so the iron and the metallic taste in beers. So is that a thing of stale beers or oxidized beers, or is that a flavor of just the iron carryover from the mash and the grains over into the final beer that you're tasting?
It sounds like it could just be higher amounts of iron sticking through the process. So if you're over that, so it's like 10 micrograms a liter can act as a catalyst for radical formation, which can cause oxidation problems. But that 50 target was when you can start to potentially taste it. So that, higher amounts of iron can have that metallic taste like you just described. Mm-hmm. And it's, typically a pale malt or a Pilsner malt, those will impart fewer metals into your beer than say specialty malts or like a crystal malt. And I thought that was interesting. That was another piece of actually in the last couple years, there's been a lot of great research into this. And there's been a really good thesis from a PhD thesis who's been great because I've reached out with a lot of questions and he's answered and get hit. So that his name, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, is Tur Mertens, who did a PhD thesis on metals in beer. And I thought is a lot of new information that I think a lot of brewers would be super into. But one of the recent studies on this just looked at what malts that you're putting in your beer and then just immediately measuring some of those metal concentrations. And this is, I believe, post fermentation because your metal figures will go down during fermentation. Certain yeasts will, I believe, uptake more of iron than other yeast strains, and it's so the number will go down during fermentation. But I don't think there's like a set number that you can count on based on the yeast strain and stuff. But their results showed that 100% Pilsner ferment, Pilsner malt ferment, was right around that taste threshold. At that 50. And that was the lowest one by far that they tested. But I should say taste thresholds are always tricky. It depends on so many things. What kind of beer is it? Are they saying it's a taste threshold in water, or is it a stout, or is it an IPA? There's a lot of things that can kind of change that. So I don't think that figure is something to really focus on. But when they did a Cara 50 and a 50% Cara 50 and a 50% Pilsner fermentation, the iron levels were over 350 micrograms a liter. So way, way higher. And same with a Cara 120 and at 20% and 80% Pilsner, they were still way up. That was closer to 240. And then they did a roasted barley one with that was only let's look. It was less than 3% roasted barley and the rest Pilsner, and that was still about 100. So according to that research, that's kind of over that taste threshold. And for me, that was interesting. I've often get like a metallic kind of taste in low gravity stouts. That's something that I've kind of keyed in on for a while, and potentially that's kind of where that's coming from. And maybe that's something that we can, reduce by mash hopping. And we'll talk about another option to reduce metals too later in the mash. But I think that's kind of, interesting. And it sounds like that my understanding from reading the research is that the metals go into the wort during your mash. Kind of they're in the liquid, they're in the solution, but then they want to settle back out into the grain, and those roasted and a roasted barley or something like a crystal 120, they can't reuptake that metal. And so it's not going back into that grist. And then that's kind of one reason why you might have more in those worts. They're not getting left behind as well, if that makes sense. So I think, what other styles might be important to think more about metal concentrations. And I think, things that are being barrel aged that have more potential to be exposed to oxygen and could react with metals, especially if you're going to heat stress those, if you're going to hot pasteurize them later. Mixed firm stuff that's sitting in a barrel for 2-3 years, it doesn't seem like a bad thing to try to lower some of those concentrations as well. So, just seems like good brewing practice. And again, an insurance policy to kind of do what you can to keep that number down.
Yeah. I think I mentioned to you in Sweden, I noticed the same thing about, low gravity stouts and metallic tastes. And also, this may also explain why a lot of, craft beer that uses crystal malts or, dark grains, or mainly the ones that have any crystal malt in them, seem to stale faster than other beers, and why there's a different staling character there. So I think that, this all could be connected. I also wonder, one of the things you're talking about, the grains, taking back in the iron in the mash. I wonder if, good hot break and cold break may also play a role in this. I know a lot of people, they don't. Yeah, again, that's, a lot of protein there in solution. And then as it comes out, coagulates could take some of those metals out with it. So I think that I've seen stuff that kind of equates good break material, break formation in the kettle as improving beer stability as well. So, perhaps that's another thing there. Yeah. So it's interesting how everything's tied together. Yeah.
Did they give any information on the iron speciation, or is it just total iron?
I think in this case, I believe they just studied the total iron.
Total iron, okay.
Figure.
Yeah, because I could see if it's iron 2, it stays in solution at low pH.
Well, and I wondered
right now, Mike.
I wondered this as well. Is the source of the iron from the field that's being grown in, any fertilizer or anything being applied, or is it coming from, since if it's that, you would think, well, it's going to be the same amount in the Pilsner malt as it is, or, in the crystal malt that's made from that malt, right? Or crazy from 2-row, and then the crystallized 2-row, same field, same grain, perhaps, it should be the same. Or is it actually coming from the process, or the malting process where, they steep and then convert and, then do the crystallization process, which usually revolves a drum that it's being tumbled in. That's made of metal. And could it be coming from that? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
You'd have to think that it could be dependent in some ways about, how it's treated or where it's grown and what's in the dirt and all that kind of stuff. When you said that, it made me think of, I'm not sure if this is a blog post or if it's in the book, but I did a stone fruit peach beer way back in the day. And it was one of the most intense metallic kind of beers that I've ever done. And I sent it in and I don't remember the figure. It went to Ward Labs and it was incredibly high. And somehow I got connected to a professor who studies, I forget what her title was, but she said, I'm almost convinced that your beer is, you taste that metallic thing because the organic peaches in your area, they use copper to spray them. And so that's getting
fungicide. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that copper is just extracting into your beer. Especially, I think she said it depends, on rain cycles. And if it rains shortly after they do it, there might be less on the fruit. And so, up to your point, I think there's a lot of factors that could contribute to that. But I did actually dry hop that beer with, I believe it was Citra Cryo, which is super high alpha, obviously, because it's, double the amount, and sent it back into Ward Labs, and the iron and our copper amount was quite a bit less. I think that's a blog post out there, but that was only done after I read that paper years ago. So fun to see results. Fun to try things that are kind of weird and actually see the results on paper pan out.
Right. Yeah. And, it's interesting to see how, things like, the alpha acids in hops have more effects than let's see. There's the dog. Has more effects.
For all you listening to the podcast, the dog is making a funny rollover position. So.
Yes.
I wasn't sure what she was doing. I'm glad you showed us the full view, Jamil, because it was odd.
She's waiting for me to go over there and rub her belly. Yeah, and she's given up. She's like, all right, I'll just lay here. I'll just lay here and listen to the show. It's interesting to see how these compounds are more than just about bittering. They have other effects on the beer. Whether it be binding iron or copper or interacting with the yeast or any bacteria or so many other things that I'm sure I don't understand or I haven't thought of. But it can be having a substantial impact on the beer. All right, let's do this. Let's take another short break, and when we come back, I want to talk more about the staling of beer and other things. You alluded to other things that could be done besides mash hopping to help preserve beer, or keep it from oxidizing. All right, I want to hear about that when we come back right after this.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're here with Scott Janish, author and brewer extraordinaire. And you can check out his beers that he's actually brewing at Sapwood Cellars. Tell us where Sapwood Cellars is located, Scott.
So we're in Columbia, Maryland. So kind of picture like in between DC and Baltimore. So kind of that area.
There you go. If you happen to be on the East Coast, the Northeast area there, go by and check them out. You guys have a tap room and you're open some days a week.
Yeah, we have a tap room. We're actually expanding it. We're in the process of getting permits and making it bigger. We've been very lucky that we've had sold most of our beer out of our tap room, and we're gonna. We talked a little bit about it. We're going to be adding a commercial kitchen coming up too. So that's now becoming more focus of mine than the beer, which kind of goes up and down like that when you're running a brewery, but luckily Mike Townsmeyer is still got his finger on the pulse when it comes to every one of our beers. So it's great to have two beer-minded owners at once. But I should also plug, we just did Tavor, the beer shipping site. We just started a separate club that you some of our mixed firm bottles you can now buy as part of that club, and they'll ship them right to your door. So especially if you've been following Mike and the Red American Sour beers and his Mad Fermentationist blog, I'm sure you've probably wanted to taste some of his beers. So that's an option out there for people that aren't even anywhere close to the Maryland area. So I'll stop with the Sapwood plugs.
Oh, no, that's all right. I think people are interested. Matter of fact, I'd like to taste some of those beers. Maybe we could have Mike on, and maybe he'll have a better internet connection than you do. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. He's been doing this longer.
All right. So before the break, you had mentioned other methods of achieving better beer shelf life, and we use the term shelf life because that's what commercial brewers use. But even as a home brewer, you unless you can drink all your beer in 1 week, which sometimes happens, you want to package some off, you want to hold it, you want to keep it for a special occasion, birth of a child, whatever, some party. It's nice to increase the we call it shelf life, but what do you want to call it for homebrew? Shelf life? Still put it on a shelf. Longevity. Yes.
Durability.
There you go. So I think it's important. So what's this technique or method, Scott, that you mentioned?
Well, actually, before I forgot to mention that we were going to just one last thing on the mash hopping is what I found kind of interesting in the last couple of years, there's been some studies on, after you dry hop, if you, examine those spent dry hops, what's still kind of intact, what do you have there?
Right.
And, they found that after dry hopping, you have about 70% of that alpha acid is still retained in the hop, because you're not extracting a lot of that into the beer during a dry hop.
Right.
This paper that was studying this had, and no intentions of those to be used as mash hops. They were trying to reuse those as part of the bittering process. And interesting that they found that the panels like the beers that were bittered with spent dry hops. They thought it was a more pleasant kind of taste. It was probably just I'd have to look. It was probably just lower IBUs. I'm not exactly sure there, but I like to try to connect different studies in different ways. And for me, I thought that was a interesting way if you don't really want to waste your hops in the mash, brand new hops that you just paid for. It seems like if you're dropping a tank for a day, this is probably more commercial brewers, but if you're dropping a tank and you have all these hops and you've already got your yeast out, you're not worried, you got the yeast out before dry hopping. So it's, pretty just hop sludge, I guess would be the best way to put it. That seems like a pretty safe thing you could also just throw into your mash for the same purposes of kind of finding some of that iron without really having to spend anymore and using some more of the, a second use hop. So just something I was going to mention and didn't earlier.
And in a beer that is, where you don't want too much hop character, certain beers, I know that seems like sacrilege here in the US, but there are beer styles where you don't want a ton of hop character. Using these hops, they won't have a lot of those more of those flavor active and aromatic compounds in them. If you take them from dry hopping, they'll just have, the alpha acids and, I mean, they'll still have some other stuff, but, it might be an even better way of going. Save you money and better results. Who knows?
Yeah. You just chuck them in and not worry about it. It's worth a shot. Right.
Right.
May never buy bittering hops again.
I had a question. So is that kind of, though, you've got to really use them once you drop them, right? Like, because Or
you
are
can
they
freeze them
storable in their condition when you? I've never really even thought about hanging on to it, so
you can freeze them.
Refreeze
Yeah,
it.
actually, in the study they did freeze them. I think it was Amarillo hops, and they froze them and then reused them.
Okay, so kind of just strained them.
They're
and
using them in the whirlpool, which I assume would have, probably not drop your whirlpool temperature much, but I guess it could have a little bit of a impact on that.
Very neat.
Squeeze the liquid out of them, freeze them. Try and keep the air out of it as well. And then, whirlpool. Hey, what if you're trying to help drop your whirlpool temperature? Maybe you throw them in a little earlier. I don't know.
Pop ice cubes.
Yes, or you can throw them in the kettle for bittering. And, like Scott's saying, calculate them as 70%. Now, is the calculation of 70% because there's a bunch of liquid in the hops and you can't get all the liquid out, and so they weigh probably 30% more? Is that the calculation, or is it because?
Well, and you probably are getting some of the alpha acids into your beer from dry hopping. It's not
most certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's probably a combination of factors, and the utilization rate's probably lower because you're obviously not going to convert 100% of the alpha acids that still remain during the kettle if you add them. But yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of more interesting. I know as like on the bigger scale, if you're going to try to freeze your hops and do all that at some point, that's more work than it's probably worth than just opening up a bag of hops that you maybe were planning to use as a dry hop and it just didn't pass the smell test or whatever. That's a good use for something like that.
Yeah, older hops, things like that. But for the home brewer, freezing, some dry hops from a batch, not a big deal. Commercially, we don't have giant freezers to freeze stuff.
Yeah.
I've taken dry hop sludge, thrown it in a bag, wrapped it up just to see what happens in the few days between when I keg and when I throw my trash out. And I've seen in just those few days, garage temps, nothing significant, surprisingly. So I can trust it in a freezer.
That is surprising.
Versus when I whirlpool, I take the whirlpool sludge and I throw that into my my milled grain bag. That always grows some nasty stuff.
I would think you have finished beer, which is low in sugar, and then hops are antiseptic just on their own. I kind of think this idea really pans out in my brain that they're very storable and drop it, save it, freeze it. You're fine.
Yeah. All right. You got us thinking, Scott.
That's what we're trying to do. The other thing this is kind of what I'm more excited about right now. And this, again, I referenced the thesis by Mertens. This is a study that did in 2021, and they've, I believe they did a follow-up study in 2023. And they were looking at non-hop ways to reduce the same thing, reduce the metals in wort, but they were looking at all kinds of different things like green tea, and I forget what all was in that study, but the one that was by far the best was pomegranate extract. Specifically this pomegranate extract at 90% ellagic acid. You can buy them in different percentages. And that's the one that just drastically dropped these counts. So they would add it into the mash at different milligrams per liter, and then they just kept doing testing the concentrations of iron. And the more they added, it just would drop it right away. So if they were up to about 60 milligrams of pomegranate extract, which is just like a powder, it's like a fine dry powder. 60 milligrams per liter was getting them down to pretty much close to the best final ferment numbers that they were getting with just testing like Pilsner malt ferments. So this is pre-ferment. Of course, those numbers will go down a little bit during fermentation, but they were getting those metals down right away in the mash just by adding the pomegranate extract. And we're not getting a sensory anything from that, like a color difference, taste difference. And so I just thought those are the kind of studies I love, because they're just like, why are they like, what? Why is that a thing that's being tested? But yeah, it's just so good at it. So that would be that actually just recently at Sapwood, we started doing this in every recipe now. So you can get a big bag of pomegranate extract from purebulk.com, and I can't remember, we calculated it's pretty cheap per batch. And again, it's another one of those insurance things that hopefully pays off. And I'm going to be I'm working on an article for this. I haven't written anything in a while, but this is something kind of new, and I thought it'd be fun. So I'm going to send a handful of beers out to get tested and see, unfortunately I don't have the same side-by-side beers, one without and one with, but we've done very similar grist with and without now. And hopefully I can send those cans out and get some sort of figures on how it's working or not. But the data is pretty convincing in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even if even if you're struggling with a metallic off flavor in your beer, perhaps this is a solution for that as well.
Yeah, I think, that the follow-up study they did in 2023, I think that the percentage reduction they were getting from the pomegranate extract of iron was close to 90%.
Now, is this is this a study from the Pomegranate Growers Association of America?
Yeah. The pomegranate lobby is one of the richest ones. Everyone knows that.
They all drive this weird purple Lamborghinis,
Yeah, big pomegranate.
No, it was interesting in Sweden, because I was kind of talking about the same things, and I said during the presentation, I was like, I'm surprised that this has been out for a couple of years now, that there's not a product, brewing product yet that has this. And then afterwards, representative from I think it's Murphy and Sons came in and said, they have test products now. It's called Mash Life that they're actually doing right now, that it is going to be on the market soon. So this sounds like something that is
nice.
Interesting
coming. And so they gave us one to or I brought a couple home in my suitcase after he approached me, and we used it in a West Coast IPA, but we actually used it during the dry hop as a way to, because dry hopping also has, the hops themselves have metals,
right?
And so we thought, why not try to throw it in? We were a little worried because I don't know how sanitary the powder is, and we're using it cold side, but so far no issues with that. But that beer ended up being one of the clearest beers that we've made. That was supposed to be. It was a West Coast IPA, but we don't have the best track record of making crystal clear West Coast IPAs, despite us using our best efforts at doing so.
Wow.
And so that was a interesting one. And so kind of more of this new research that is coming out on this is, it's not just pomegranate extract was tested as one of the highest of things that we can just buy, but the other one that's really high, and I'm gonna see if I can pronounce it right here, is Puna Calogen. And so that actually outperformed the pomegranate.
Puna Calogen. Yeah.
And so
I use that, all the time. Right? Yeah.
So that, I believe that's what's in the product that we use, but that's actually can clear up a beer. It's larger molecules and can bind, my understanding, bind better and drop things out, where the ellagic acid from the pomegranate extract is a polyphenol, and the molecules aren't as big. And so like if you're filtering, they might pass through your filter. And if they're a polyphenol, they might react with proteins and maybe potentially cause haze. So I think if stability is something or if haze is something that you want to retain, I think I would probably stick with the pomegranate extract. But I don't believe those products are out yet, but it does sound like it sounds like they're coming.
Huh. That's fascinating. All right. Hate to do this, but we need to take one last break. And afterwards, we'll wrap up with Scott right after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking with Scott Janish, brewer owner at Sapwood Cellars, author of the new IPA, and a great mind in the brewing world, and a sharer of his information, which is really what puts you high up there. A lot of people have information. They want to keep it secret. They're just like, oh no, other brewers will find out, and then I'll be competing with them. And it's like if that's how you base your success of your brewery, then you've already failed. I think you base it off of the quality you produce, not sharing information and making the industry better. The better the industry is, the better beer is, and the more customers we have. So be like Scott and share your information. Help other brewers, be better.
Grow the game.
It'll only do everybody better, including yourself. A rising tide lifts all boats.
Inspired by Jamil, though, I think I told you that back when I was a beginning home brewer, I loved listening to the Can You Brew It with you and Tasty. And I was amazed not only that you guys would say everything that you knew, but you would go to all these other pro brewers and they would just, help you in some cases, try to clone one of their beers. So totally agree. I love it when people just share information and there's no secret bullets to this.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's, it's still all about hard work and being a great brewer. All right. We had promised some information on thiol precursors in the mash. We were talking about that a little bit, alluded to that. Tell us, does mash hopping play any part in that?
Yeah. So, I guess I should say right away, and I think, at this point, at least in the U.S., we can actually use these strains. A lot of times you go overseas, they're actually not allowed to use the thiolized strains. But mash hopping, I think, in terms of thiolized strains, is really only something to look at when it comes to the not super high thiol producing strains. Mm-hmm. And so really it's more of like a cosmic punch kind of thing where you're trying to up the amount of precursors that you can get from the hops themselves, because they have so many more bound thiol precursors than they do free. And so, it's really more with when you're using a strain that's like the Heliogazer, for example, is one that is just so good at freeing thiols. And that's just from the grain precursors themselves. There's enough there that that's just going to blow everything out of the water and you're going to taste it. Where, something like Cosmic Punch, or I'm forgetting the White Labs
Tropical
strain.
Yeast.
They have one that
non-GMO blend.
So that would be one where I would consider mash hopping. Just if you're trying to up it, you're trying to make that yeast have the best chance at freeing thiols, you might as well feed it as many precursors as you can. And of course, there's certain hops that are higher in precursors than others. Calypso is one that is high. Saws, Cascade. Hopsteiner has a new hop that is high in it. Is that a Laura?
I think it's a Laura. I have a pound of it I haven't used yet.
So, and then if you're going to use things like Salvo or something like that, it makes sense to me to if you're using one of those lower thiol producing strains to consider using one that might be higher in thiols. I haven't seen any research on if thiol precursors remain in those extracts, but I would think some of them would. Of course, there's other, mash hopping is one way to get there with those high precursors varieties, but there's also products like Phantasm, which is, the dried Sauvignon Blanc grape skins that are high in those precursors. That 3MH is what makes some of those Sauvignon Blancs so tropical and passion fruity. So that's a product that you could use. Mega Motueka is one. That's a blend of Motueka is a really high precursor thiol hop variety, and then of course that's blended with Phantasm in a pellet, which is pretty neat. Thiol Boost is one that Berkeley yeast has. It's made from plant precursors that will also act as obviously precursors for a yeast strain to act on, but again, I think it's those yeast strains that aren't as dominant in terms of their thiol releasing capabilities, those non-Pat B ones that will, that you're trying to increase the complexity, but you're not trying to make this like absolute thiol bomb where it just kind of dominates and that's all you get. So,
couple of questions from the chat here. Ryan wanted to say, Scott, you changed my beer game. Very much appreciates what you've done. And Scott was asking, does mash hopping impact mash pH? And if so, what adjustments should be made to maintain target pH?
That's not something I guess we notice with our, 2 pounds in 10 barrels. I don't think we're seeing a big pH change from that. If you were throwing Phantasm into your kettle or even in your mash, that's where we have seen a pH drop. That will actually lower it. At least when we were using, I believe about 2 pounds per barrel or something like that, we were seeing a drop in our pH, so we would have to compensate a little, but not for mash hopping and not with the pomegranate extract either. We're not seeing a big change. I think we're using about 30 grams per 10 barrel batch. So per turn, it's about 30 grams of pomegranate extract in the mash. So that's, again, not a lot. So it's no surprise there's not much of a change in pH.
Okay. And one last question before we let you go. Merlinus was asking, are there dry yeast you would recommend to affect thiols, to release thiols?
I don't know if there is any thiolized dry yeast. I believe verdant yeast does say it has the beta-glucosidase enzyme. I don't know how active it is. That's something I would have to look at. But I think that's the only one that is someone else. Yeah.
Lallemont put a sheet out of what yeast they have that affect certain thiolized and the other biotransformations. They give you like a little chart. It's just their standard yeast. It's not a thiolized yeast, but they tell you, similar to how White Labs does, what their yeasts do. That's a sheet, a PDF that's available on the web.
Oh, Merlinus, that might be a good thing to seek out. All right. Thank you so much again, Scott. I know it's late for you. You're on the East Coast, and we really appreciate your time. It was great to see you in Sweden, and I'll probably try and drag you out for another adventure somewhere else in the world, if you don't mind. And then maybe we can get some of your sours and get Mike on to talk about them as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Expect a ton of other emails from me asking you to do lots of extra work on my behalf.
Well, hopefully we can get you to the East Coast and we can brew something up.
Yeah, I'd love to. Fun. I'd love to.
Sweet.
All right. Thanks again. Again, the book is called The New IPA by Scott Janish. The brewery is called Sapwood Cellars. Go check him out. Great guy. Great stuff. He's been sharing for a long time and helping us all out. So you should go check that out. If you're listening live, we have another show coming up, live Q&A. with Mike and Travis and myself. And we will be covering some of the questions that you have sent in. You can send them in by email to brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. Please send an email to the new owner of Blickman Engineering, Drew Barnes. You can still send it to feedback@blickmanengineering.com, and I'll make sure that he reads all of those and appreciates how great a listenership you are and why you're worth him paying for this show. All right, until then, everybody, brew strong.
Brew strong.